City of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Meeting, recorded October 7, 2020.
We have everyone on the line in the meeting now except for Chair Beveridge. So let me check here. Yeah. Oh. So if we want, we can start the meeting, and then if Chair Beveridge doesn't attend the meeting by the time we initiate the meeting, we'll have to, as we did a few months ago, appoint an honorary chairperson for the time being until he is able to make the meeting. So we can start this at 2:03 p.m. and we can take the roll. So Chair Beveridge is absent at the moment. Alder Jennings?
Here.
Commissioner Mccomb? Absent. Commissioner Siebert? Right. Commissioner Scripps?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Debachi? Hopefully.
Here.
Thank you. And Commissioner McFarland?
Present.
All right, thank you. All right, next, if we can discuss, and let me double check, Chair Beveridge isn't here. We can appoint a temporary chair in the time being. So do we have a motion by anyone to appoint a temporary chair?
I move to appoint Commissioner Jennings.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. All right, then Alderperson Jennings, you are the appointed chair, so I can have you run the meeting.
All right. Second. All right, so we do have a quorum. Our second agenda item is the report of the September 2nd, 2020 meeting of the Historic Preservation Design Review Commission. Do we have any comments, questions about the minutes? And a motion, please.
I'll move to accept.
Do we have a second? Looks like
I'll move the second.
all right, thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are accepted. Next agenda item is a request from Angie Novak on behalf of Century Insurance for a design review to perform exterior improvements to 1105 Main Street. Mr. Kuhn, would you take over, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Alder Jennings. So I will just make the comment before we get going. I did see Commissioner Mccomb enter the meeting, so please, for the record, she is present for the meeting. So to discuss this discuss this design review, I should say. So as the commission may recall, a few weeks ago, back in August, the applicant did apply for a design review to conduct various exterior improvements onto the subject property that was discussed before, such as adding emergency egress doors, signage, vinyl graphics to the storefront doors and windows, and then the accessible ramp. Now, after the design review took place and was approved, the applicant did come to the realization that the shaft entrance door proposal that was included in the August proposal was not sufficient with their needs at the point. So there were some discussions over the last 3-4 weeks as far as what would be the most appropriate outcome to replace the shaft entrance door example. And as what was included in the staff report, the main purpose of the shaft entrance door was to access these air handling units on the roof of the door for any maintenance purposes that would need to take place, etc. So ultimately, as you can see here on the screen, these were the main improvements that took place during the August design review. Now, subsequently, the applicant did propose to install a ladder that's going to be affixed to the far southeast corner of the building, as you can see on the next slide. There we go. So you can see here on the image on your left-hand screen shows the approximate location of where this ladder will be affixed to again, the southeast corner of the building, and then more of a mock-up of what this ladder will look like. Now, discussing more of the actual proposal itself, there are a couple of things that would be of note to stand out that will be included here in the conditions of approval. First and foremost, that should this be accepted by the commission, that the ladder be fixated within the mortar of the bricks and not in the brick itself. Secondly, the applicant did not finalize a specific color that's proposed, and that's something that before the ladder is put up via the obtaining the building permit, that's something that staff would want to take a look at and subsequently approve to make sure that the color of the ladder is in cohesion with the existing facade and the overall look and feel of the building and the surrounding neighborhood. So like I mentioned on the screen, you can see all the conditions of approval. And with that, I can take any questions any of the commissioners may have. And I believe I did see the applicant on this call to Alder Jennings in case there were any questions the commissioners may have for her as well.
Hey everybody, I'm Angie Novak. I am on. I'm able to answer any questions that you might have. I do want to just, Adam, if you could go back to the rendering of that image with the ladder that I submitted to you a couple slides back.
Sure.
I just want to make a note here. So the one that I photoshopped onto the building, and it's hard to see because it's kind of set back, it's kind of small, but my intent is to have something at the bottom of it that kind of locks it shut so that not anybody can just access our roof and the roofs that are connected to ours. I know Alder Jennings, you had sent me a note on that, and I did not previously know that that was an issue, but it makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of bars downtown and people do crazy things with the not good intentions. So I do just want to mention that it would be more so the look of the left option versus the right, which the right ladder looks open like anyone could use it, and that's not our intent at all. I want to make it as secure as possible under lock and key.
Thank you for adding that information. And I do think it's appropriate to bring up an issue that I was made aware of today, actually, from another long-term downtown tenant. And I also have had a conversation with Chief Center since that time. And this does go beyond this discussion, but I think a good place to begin this discussion is relevant to this agenda item. I think it's appropriate to talk about it in historic preservation, but it goes beyond that. So apparently, it's been a long time issue that people are climbing up on the roofs of downtown businesses. They're doing it in various ways. Some of it is popularized by what might be called urban rock climbing. They're accessing it through unsecure apartment windows, and they're accessing roofs through unsecure, it might be exterior fire escapes, and also brickwork that is needing tuck work. So Associate Planner Kuhn, how do we, I know it's beyond this discussion, but I appreciate that Century is making sure that this is secure, but this is also a broader conversation that I just wanted to throw out there that won't be resolved today, but I want to make everyone aware of it. And I think it needs to be a future discussion. Maybe you can give some direction on that.
Yeah, and I think going to specifically talking this proposal here that's before us today, the applicant did discuss, just now about having the ladder itself being essentially locked from public use with having this door unlocked, that hopefully by that action that it should mitigate any of those potential concerns. But I mean, that's something that we can talk privately afterwards, and if there's any, just kind of talk a little bit more about what are some of the concerns that you've had, and then essentially take it from there as far as if there are steps that the city could explore possibly doing regarding this.
And with that, Ms. Novak, we don't see a frontal view of the cabinet, but I'll leave it up to you to figure out, or if you could explain, will this be a smooth surface? Because now that we know people are climbing things and sort of rock climbing, you'll need to strategize, I think, what that looks like.
Yeah, I think, and I apologize, I don't have like the specs on a specific model or anything to share at this point in time. I can certainly share that once we do, but I think our intention would be to have, a stainless steel door, for lack of a better term, that encases the ladder. But I mean, ultimately where there's a will, there's a way. So I think we can just do the best that we can to make it as hard as possible for anyone to get on that ladder. But yeah, I think it would be a smooth surface to make it. That would probably make it the hardest for anyone to try and climb up, versus something that's textured that someone could get a little more grip on. Does that answer your question?
Sure, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? See,
I have one, Tori.
Go ahead, Commissioner Mccomb.
I was wondering how high that safety feature is on the top part of the ladder. I can't tell, but it looks to me like if one person was piggyback on another person, they could reach that safety feature and boost themselves up. Just a thought I had from my many excursions on the rooftops, which I'm joking about.
Yeah, no, that's a valid question. Again, this might be something that I run by Adam once we iron out a specific detail on, like I said, the model and the make of this ladder. I'd like it to go as high as possible, and I don't know if it's even an option where it goes all the way up. To be honest, this is kind of outside of my realm. I usually don't deal with this kind of stuff, so I don't know. I don't have an answer for you, but I could certainly I'm happy to submit as much information about it as possible prior to the actual installation, because I don't want anybody crawling on top of our building. I know Century people above me don't want it. I know our neighbors don't want it. So I certainly don't want to be responsible for anything that comes of that.
Yeah, and if I could interject too, I think there's two things that can stand out here regarding this discussion. First off is that the two images that you see on your screen are more potential designs for this ladder. Now, of course, should this be approved by the commission, this would be something that staff and the applicant would work towards as far as not only the color, but making sure that the design is appropriate as well. Now, in regards to the question about any members of the public using that ladder and going up onto the rooftop, I think what the applicant said a little while back and saying that if there's a will, there's a way that people are going to do it. So of course, one of the things that we'll be looking at is, making sure to the greatest extent possible that does not happen. Obviously, there's going to be certain actions that it'd be hard to mitigate, but that's something that, again, should the commission approve this design request, that's something that we work with the applicant to make sure any possible concerns would be mitigated as a result of this.
Another thing too, I know just the presence of like a camera, a surveillance, may be beneficial in situations like this. So I don't know if there are just going back to like this overall issue of people getting access to rooftops, if we know like where they're accessing, maybe it's something where the city can look at strategically placing security cameras or something, or even for my particular request today, you know, if that's something you'd like me to explore, I can certainly do that. Century is no stranger to adding cameras to our exterior, and to be honest, since we purchased this building, we haven't added cameras, but it's certainly in our plans to do that at some point. So we could certainly look at that too. I know that can deter people from doing things they shouldn't be doing if they know that they're going to be caught on camera. So just food for thought.
All right, great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the commission? I don't think I see anyone from the public. So commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'll move to approve the design review request for 1105 Main Street with the conditions listed on the document, as well as the door to prevent people coming up.
Now, would that be an added condition that you would want to place on Commissioner Mccomb, or?
I'm just reading the conditions.
Sure.
Yes, I guess it would be. Yeah. Do you want me to say that again?
Well, we would have to approve adding this additional condition onto this condition of approval. So if.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, then I'll move to add the condition regarding locking ladder access to the public to the staff recommendation.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah, I take that as one motion, right, with the addition. So do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you, Angie. Next item is agenda item number 4 is a request from Greg Goki for a design review to perform exterior improvements at 1124 Main Street. Associate Planner Kroon, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Alder Jennings. So as the commission may recall, earlier this year, the city has entered into a development agreement with the Opera House LLC to initiate the redevelopment of the former Fox Theater. Now, with this redevelopment, there'll be essentially 2 uses, one interior, one exterior. Now, this interior use is comprised of both event space for public and private spaces, public and private events, I should say, such as having informational meetings, wedding ceremonies, civic events, etc. Now, the exterior plan is going to consist of an outdoor beer garden, and what will be discussed later on, there will be buffering techniques that are proposed by the applicant, such as fencing and landscaping to help contain these activities within the subject property itself. Now, as far as the exterior improvements that are proposed in this application, it involves installing new brick onto the front and rear facades, having roof repair, masonry work, window and door installations, and then overall general maintenance. And then the south facade is intended to be restored as it was originally built, and this was before the Fox Theater when it used to be the Opera House, which in part, as I'll discuss later on, will include the removing of the Fox marquee sign. So findings, as the commissioners can recall, there's greater detail in the packet itself, but overall, some of the main findings that we found when reviewing this design review request is, like I mentioned before, a landscaping plan would be submitted, I should say, and approved by staff, along with the proposed fencing, which we'll discuss here. Now, the applicant does intend to install new brick that is compatible with the previous masonry used on the building during the time when the building was used as the Opera House. And a significant location for this new brick is going to be where the Fox Marquee sign is currently. Now, there is proposed to be a restoration rather of the two pairs of double doors with the poster display cases. And the purpose of this is to match the more pre-1940s architectural style of the facade itself. Again, this was during the time when it was the Opera House, before when it became the theater itself. And a wider door design is proposed, and that's primarily to adhere to current ADA accessibility standards. Now, as the commission can recall, there has been significant moisture penetration that occurred due to the deterioration of the roof itself. Now, as such, the proposed roof would aim to alleviate these concerns along with any rodent infestation that occurred in the past. Now, the second to last bullet point is that while these display windows are proposed to be replaced, the applicant's intent is to install these new windows that are similar into the size, into the scale, and the detail as the previous windows. And then lastly, as I mentioned, and what was included in the agenda packet as well, was that before the Fox Marquee sign was constructed, there was actually an original wooden balcony that took place there. And it's the applicant's intention to construct a balcony where the Fox Marquee sign is currently to help restore, again, how the facade looked during the Opera House times before the Fox Theater. So as we can see, here are some two more historical photos that I'm sure the commission has saw in the past. So the image on the left shows the building used as the Opera House, and you can see in the corner right over here, the balcony where the Fox Marquee sign is right now, and then the right-hand portion of your screen, what the building looks like today, essentially, as far as the south facade is concerned. So the primary focus would be is to help restore this south facade to make it look like what it did pre-1940s during the time of the Opera House. So here are some images as well. So the image on the far left-hand portion of the screen shows the two uses combined as proposed by the applicant. You can see the beer garden in the outside along with the fencing, and then proposed landscaping that will occur as well. And then farther back in the image, you can see the tables and the seating that will take place in the interior portion of the building. The middle image rather shows the rough layout of what the south facade rather looked like during the times of the Opera House. And then the right portion, the last picture on your right-hand portion of the screen shows the image by the applicant of what the south facade will look like at the end of this project. So with that, staff does recommend approval of this design request subject to the conditions that are seen on this screen. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Is the applicant here?
Oh, let's check.
This is Greg Goki from Wildcard Corp on behalf of the Opera House LLC.
Right. You're welcome to add anything, and I'd like to remind everybody, please mute your device unless you're talking.
Thank you, Alder Jennings. Yeah, I don't have anything additional to add. Mr. Mccomb did a great job explaining basically the concept, which is the south facade will get restored to essentially what it looked like 1890-ish when they first built it. On the back side of the building, we will attempt to mimic as much as what would have been indoors, outdoors with the beer garden, with the addition of the balcony on the back of the building. But if any questions, anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Questions from the commission?
Is there a plan for the marquee once it's dismantled from the building?
We're currently talking to historic organizations nearby to see if anyone is interested in it. We're not quite sure where it may end up long term.
Any other questions or comments from the commission?
just a comment that I do know, and Jennings, I know we worked on a little project about this a year ago, just that the marquee does hold significance for the community. And so making sure that the community, that there's transparency about this project and that the community is aware of what's happening and the fact that this restoration is bringing it back to an earlier time, I think that that will help ease anxieties if people see the marquee being dismantled, as well as having a plan for where that will go so that that part of history, you know, remains intact.
Tori, I have a, Chair Jennings, I have a question. It's Mary.
Please go ahead.
I'm a little confused about the conclusion of the staff report, where staff recommends approval and says the overall project will restore the storefront to a more contemporary design while restoring and extenuating the historical elements of the building. I'm confused about that. I'm just confused how it can be more contemporary while restoring historical elements.
Sure. So what the intention was there is to state that with this proposal in place here, that there's really, this proposal is twofold. One, to exacerbate more of the historical qualities that took place on the south facade. Again, this is predating 1940 when it used to be the Opera House, not the Fox Theater. And so the purpose of this is to try to highlight these historical features on the south facade, but then bringing it up to more of a 21st century look and feel and making sure that it's more contemporary in nature. So that's what I was trying to get at, is to balance both the proposed uses, the proposed architectural style the applicant is proposing, while still enforcing and re-ingraining the historical elements of what the building looked like during the Opera House days.
Well, you might, and I'm really thinking in terms of any press releases or publicity the city or Wildcard does about this. I think you're talking about contemporary uses and requirements like ADA while preserving historical design elements.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
That doesn't come across in either what you said or what's written here. It still is like, we're going to be contemporary but historical. So that's just a concern of mine, because as a native to Stevens Point, I know that there is going to be pushback about removal of the marquee, although I think it's a great idea. But right now it's sounding confusing. It's sounding like an oxymoron. And I'm happy to help in any writing process for any release that might come out.
Alder Jennings, if I may.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just a poor phrase in the staff report, and we do apologize for it. But I think Commissioner Mccomb, you hit it right on the head. The contemporary nature is bringing the property up to ADA standards for the historical structure, which is a really important piece of this this redevelopment. But also recognizing that a lot of the intricate details of the Fox facade or the Opera House facade will be re-exposed and reconstructed as part of this project. But yeah, it's just, poor choice of words, and we do apologize for that from the staff's perspective.
And I'm not just complaining. I'm a former college teacher, and I'm a rhetorician, and I know how the public is probably going to respond, and so how it's presented is really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Well noted.
Has the State Historical Society weighed in on the project. I know that this is on the National Register, so have the historic preservationists at the state level seen the plans, and is there an attempt to make sure that that National Register, that the spirit of that remains intact?
I guess I would defer that to the applicant. The city would not lead the applicant through that process. That would be upon the applicant to obtain any proper approvals from the state or feds. Typically, when a project is not receiving things like historic tax credits, there are no additional approvals besides the local approval. Just because it's on the National Register of Historic Places, and because it's proposed to be redeveloped into I think that the more historic portion, I wouldn't see any major concerns, but I guess I would defer that question more to the applicant.
Thank you, Director. I would say we have the state and the National Historic Registries. Once we moved past this process, it was our intention to ensure they knew about the change we were making to take it back to the Opera House instead of as the Fox Theater. But once again, just as we are with the Marquee, we're trying to work with all these agencies to ensure that we're meeting that historic piece of it, while at the same time bringing it up to more ADA and contemporary standards.
Thanks for the clarification. I just know that there are a lot of eyes on this project. And so, you know, making sure that there's transparency on that front, I think will only benefit kind of community support on this endeavor.
We would be in full agreement with you on that, and that's our intention as well as we continue to move forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Personally, I'm excited to see restoration back to the Opera House style. I realize that there, as has been commented, a lot of attachment to the theater era because that's what people have living memory of. Seeing no one from the public who wishes to comment, commissioners, what are your wishes?
I'll move to accept the staff recommendations.
I'll second.
Very well, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions or comments?
I'm wondering if we could make an addition in trying to make sure that the marquee remains intact and that it is preserved to the best of the ability of the applicant. And I don't know what that process would look like, but something to address the marquee and its history in some way.
Commissioner DeBosch, are you willing to amend your motion to make that inclusion?
Yes, I'd move to make every effort possible to keep the marquee whole. I know the applicant probably cannot guarantee where it's going to go, but they can make every effort to keep the marquee whole.
Commissioner Mccomb, do you accept that?
I do.
Okay, we have a motion and a second with an amendment to make every effort to keep the marquee intact. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you. And thanks to the applicant for being present to answer questions. Number 5 is a discussion only item about demolition by neglect ordinance. And I appreciate Mr. Kuhn putting in quite a bit of work into this and looking up a lot of resources and including those in the packet for us. I actually prompted this agenda item. It's something that I've talked about for many, many years, but it was brought to a head, I think, for me with the demolition of the Fox Theater, and seeing a need for, or at least the consideration of a demolition by neglect ordinance, not only in the historic downtown area, but for many of the historical properties that we have throughout the downtown area, which are owned by a landlord that has allowed properties to deteriorate to the point that they may not be able to be salvaged. So looking forward, I was wondering if there's a way to do more to make sure those properties do not get to a point where they need to be demolished. So Adam, since you did so much work on this, do you want to review a little bit of what you found out, and we can go from there?
Sure. Thank you, Alder Jennings. So I did, as Alder Jennings stated in the past, there is a great deal of information that was included in the agenda packet, and there's a lot more resources and information that's available through.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Commissioner Mccomb, could you mute, please? We're getting feedback. Thank you.
Remute. There we go. Yeah, so as I was saying, there's a lot more information too that just wasn't included in the agenda packet, just based on the depth and exhaustiveness of, frankly, this topic in general. But to kind of, when I was doing a fair amount of research on this, what kind of kept sticking through my mind when reviewing other municipalities' demo mine neglect ordinances were, it's essentially kind of, this might be a weird analogy, but it's kind of like, humans taking a multivitamin, for example. And what I mean by that is that, gradually, the older that we get, usually there's more aches, there's more pains, there's more things going on that we want to do more preventative maintenance on. Do you necessarily need to take a multivitamin? No, but say if you have a lower deficiency in iron or potassium or something along those lines, you take a multivitamin, not necessarily because you need it at this very moment, but it's something to help down the road so nothing further progresses that would be detrimental. And this is that was kind of that same analogy that I was thinking with this demo mine neglect ordinance, in that the purpose of this ordinance is purpose of an ordinance like this is not targeting buildings that are in disrepair, that are applicable for a raise order, for example. It's buildings that you can see telltale signs of there being structural insufficiencies. So the page that I have on the screen right now that hopefully you all can see shows, and this is verbatim in the historic preservation chapter within the Code of Ordinances, and it talks about all the different types of.
We're not seeing that.
Oh,
we're seeing your files, is what we see.
My files. Oh, there we go. All right, can you see it now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so all of these show, the deterioration of exterior walls or roofs or chimneys. So those are more focusing on, are there, say, peeling, chipping paint, things that are not necessarily posing any structural deficiencies per se, but are something that, if action isn't taken, it could lead to more serious consequences, more serious issues down the road. So the purpose of how municipalities in the past have handled demo mine neglect ordinances are to essentially target that middle area, areas where it's not in need of a raise order, for example, but think areas where there's a structural need if it's a deterioration of, again, one of the items that's shown on the screen. So I can talk more at length, that's from what's in the memo, what was included in the agenda packet as well, but to kind of surmise staff's overall interpretation of other demo mine neglect ordinances are that I think it's standalone to say that the reasoning behind a demo mine neglect ordinance is just in that there's a purpose, the purpose is real, and of course we all strive for having historical buildings well maintained so it can improve and stabilize not only its property values, its historical significance, and overall lifespan. Now there are there concerns or just general topics that would have to be flushed out, just again, taking more of a 30,000-foot view of this, and that's, again, reading over like Madison's demo by neglect ordinance and other local municipalities, how they handle their ordinances. So one of the things is, how frequent would this ordinance actually be invoked? So when Madison adopted theirs back in 2015, since then, this demo by neglect ordinance have been invoked once, and we can talk at greater length about the issue down in Madison, what took place. But essentially, is the question before how often this ordinance would be invoked is there a pressing need? Is there essentially value in having an ordinance, even though it might be more unlikely than likely that it would be utilized relatively frequently? So that's one of the first options, one of the first topics that staff thought of when we were looking at these ordinances. The second one is, who should this ordinance apply to? And what we mean by that is that, should this ordinance apply only to historical buildings that's located within the broader historic districts, or should this be overarching, applied to all buildings within a historic district? And staff's belief is that it should apply more towards just historic buildings and not the overall historic district, primarily because, as we can all relate to, if there's buildings, say, that are 10 years old, for example, peeling paint, for example, on a 10-year-old building may or may not be more consequential than what it would be on, say, a historic building that's been around for several decades, a century, you name it. So that's a question that I think would have to get flushed out, and that's, who should this ordinance apply to? Third is really, how different is a demo by neglect ordinance, how different that is versus the current operations that take place and staff trying to maintain these historic buildings. And I discussed fairly in depth in terms of the processes that currently take place on a staff level and how that is similar to how municipalities have structured a demo by neglect ordinance. And some of the quick bullet pointed, one of them were more of the enforcement side of things. Now, how Madison, other municipalities who have demo by neglect ordinances, how they enforce these ordinances were essentially, you have X number of weeks to remediate this issue, depending on, of course, the severity of the issue at hand, and then subsequently, if the issue wouldn't be remediated, there'd be recurring citations as a result. And that would be pretty similar to how staff currently handles issues with regards to historic buildings, with regards to any land use violation, work without permits, etc. So that's something too that, just again, taking more of a 30,000-foot view, it appears that the overall structure of how a demo by neglect ordinance is administered, enforced, is pretty similar to how staff currently operates this issue. And then lastly, how, and this is frankly a significant question to answer, and that's, how do you measure whether a historic building is undergoing demo by neglect? And what staff means by that is, of course, it's fairly subjective in nature, right? If one person's view that, hey, this paint that is chipping on a building, it's in significant need of repair, whereas another person might think, it's not as worrisome of an ordeal. So that's something that I think also needs to flushed out in terms of having more concrete, specific steps and actions as far as how do you measure whether a building is undergoing demo by neglect, because that's in essence the purpose of such an ordinance, is to like I mentioned before, to help make sure that these historic buildings do not go into disrepair. So having an adequate measurement tool of measuring that and making sure that though any such issues are remediated, that would be important. So I don't want to talk for too long and interrupt any other comments, questions, thoughts that any of the commissioners had. But like I said, that's a general view that staff had with regards to how other municipalities have handled the demo by neglect ordinance.
All right, thank you very much. And again, thank you for a considerable amount of work and research that you put into this. Again, this is only a discussion item. The most that commissioners could do at this time would be to direct staff to pursue this item, but I'm interested to see what others think. Please go.
Tori, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Adam, in the document further down from the National Trust, it further it talks about something called affirmative maintenance. Could you describe what affirmative maintenance is?
Sure, and this kind of relates more towards how where I had it more in the beginning of this memo, and that's how a demo by neglect ordinance is structured really goes at the heart of what's the overall issue that the municipality would want to target. And that, there's different ways of maintaining and preserving the historical features on a building itself. And what I had in there's really 4 key areas. There's preservation, there's rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. And how you have, and how you structure such an ordinance matters in terms of which one of those 4 buckets, so to speak, you target. Do you target more of the preservation side, the rehabilitation, the restoration, the reconstruction? So going to your question about the affirmative maintenance, my interpretation of it, and I know Alder Jennings was looking a lot into this as well, so I can have her speak at least to what her interpretation of it was. But my interpretation of it was more so in the bucket of the restoration side, and how they had restoration, let me find it here, is accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared to a particular period of time by means of the removal of features from other periods in its history and reconstruction of missing features from the restoration period. So my interpretation of that was to focus more on this restoration side of things and making sure that any maintenance is done not only to ensure the structural capabilities of the building itself, but also to restore it to whichever historical features that took place on that building previously. So I don't know if Alder Jennings had any other comments or clarifying items that you want to discuss regarding this question.
No, I do not. Thank you for that question. Any other comments, questions?
This is Mary. I have a question, or maybe it's a comment.
Sure.
And I guess I just want to clarify, there's a church in the 9th district, the one on Brawley and Strong's, the old Lutheran church, that isn't on the historic register because the tower was taken off. Most of the tower was taken off, and it's in horrible shape. The property owner has been very remiss. The inside of the building is incredible. The windows are incredible. But this kind of thing, because it's not on the historic register, nor is it in one of our historic designated neighborhoods, this wouldn't have any effect on that. We would have no way to make that person take care of that sad building.
Well, actually, when I first spoke with, I'll respond, Commissioner Mccomb, to that, because when I originally spoke with Director of Community Development about this, and that even precedes Director Konoski, it was identifying properties throughout the core area, not just the historic designated area, which I think is an important part of this because of properties like that. The Episcopal Church, for example. We have a lot of expertise on this commission in terms of being able to identify historical properties throughout the core, and is a demolition by neglect ordinance, can it possibly be used to also identify those properties and not simply focus on the Main Street, Clark Street corridor? That's how I originally talked about it.
Super, thanks.
Alder, if I may.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that kind of gets to one of the discussion points is, you know, we do have our historic districts that I think have been, for the most part, pretty well protected. But these items like the 1700 Strongs, which is the church on the corner of Strongs and Brawley, you know, how do we go about identifying these specific historic structures and then letting property owners know that because you've been identified as a historic structure, now you are subject to a demolition by neglect ordinance. And those are the things that we've got to think about, and would be part of I think the overall commission's discussion on what exactly we would envision this being. As some of you may know, I believe it was almost as a result of when the city constructed the mall in the late 70s, early 80s, the city did a historic inventory of the city. I believe it's called Gateway to the Pines, and it's a small book that identifies a number of properties that I would argue are outside of the historic district. Now, there's a number of the properties that are within the historic district, but could we use that as kind of our base and say, okay, this booklet, although dated and should be updated, you know, could that be the kind of the governing tool on where or what properties are utilized as part of the historic designation or the historic demolition by neglect ordinance? So those are the types of things we've got to flush out a little bit yet. But you know, I think what staff's asking for, is there an interest? If so, we can start putting together some points and take it back and forth from the committee to staff until we get comfortable enough to run it through what I'll call the cycle of government. So.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear from Commissioners McFarland and Scripps. Do you have any additions to this conversation?
I'm excited to sort of see it flesh out a little bit more. I do get concerned when we move outside of historic districts that we might be overreaching in our scope as a commission, but that would be a conversation to have, I would think, with the broader community as well, and making sure that there would be buy-in and support of this idea.
Well, I think this is Eric McFarland. I think this sounds like a good idea to start pursuing, because what we were left with, especially with the Fox Theater, was just sort of shaking our head. What do you do when someone leaves a building to rot forever, and there's nothing we can do until it comes to the point where we say we gotta destroy it? So I know there's another church near downtown that is a private residence right now that I believe was sold. The church sold it because it needed so much work done on it, and now I haven't seen any work being done on it at all. So I wonder if something like this could help save important buildings like that. So I too would like to see it, what an ordinance would look like.
And that's the same owner who owns the Lutheran Church on Strongs and Brawley. He owns both those historic churches.
I would certainly agree that any effort that we can make to do some things proactively instead of waiting, it would be a good thing.
Okay, so it sounds like there's consensus or at least interest in moving forward. So if that is the case, if I'm correct in that, somebody needs to make a motion basically to direct staff to pursue a more evolved ordinance and bringing that back to the commission at another time. Actually, I'm not sure a motion needs to be made.
No, I don't think a motion's in order. I would say that there's general consensus to bring something back to the commission at a later date, and we'll definitely start working on this.
Okay. Everyone okay with that, I assume? All right, thank you. We'll look forward to that at a future meeting. Last is staff update.
Sure. I don't have any updates offhand. I don't know if Director Karnowski, if you do.
I think just for the commission's information, it not necessarily within your purview, but the convent structure is currently under contract for redevelopment and repurposing. I will publicly state that the entire convent is expected to remain and be repurposed. We are working through the development agreement right now, and the council's been very supportive of this project. So if you talk about historic properties that were, I would argue, threatened for things like this, like demolition by neglect, the convent structure itself is in very good shape, but similar situation where, you know, the sisters have been relocated, and now the convent, out of concern, you know, may have sat vacant, and over time, because no one's utilizing the building, it might have fallen into disrepair. You know, one of the best ways to save historic structures, and I've said this publicly before, is through economic development. And what exactly is going on at the convent and repurposing it and getting people back into the building on a more regular basis or a consistent basis is part of that. So, you know, just the convent and its historic nature and its cultural importance to the community, it's nice to see that kind of out of the gate, we've got a developer who's interested in doing a project there, and hopefully there'll be more to come in the coming weeks as we go through the development process with the negotiations on the development agreement, and of course the designation of the planned development district through the zoning, and hopefully this will be a project that'll last for several more generations of city residents. So that's all I have on the historic side, and thanks again for everybody for making time today.
All right, thank you very much. With that, our agenda is exhausted and we are adjourned at exactly 3:00 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.